As the witch trials of early modern Europe came into their most intense, most lethal period starting in the early 17th century, the phenomenon interestingly mutated. Rather than being an overwhelmingly rural affair, there was an urban shift. Victims and accusers were increasingly among the middle and the upper classes. Careful trial records began to be kept. Accusations by women were made against some powerful men, and in some of those cases, did lead to those men's execution. And more striking than all of this was now the association of mass demonic possession with those cases of witchcraft. Largely emerging from France, these mass possession slash sorcery trials would reach their zenith with the affair of Loudun from around 1630 through the final exorcisms in 1637 and the execution for sorcery of the priest Urbain Grandier on 18th of August 1634. Indeed, this case would produce one of the most curious documents from the entire period, one of the few surviving alleged pacts with the devil and other demons, the linchpin artifact of the entire elaborated theory of witchcraft. Now, if you're interested in magic or Hermetic philosophy, alchemy, Kabbalah, or the history of the occult, make sure to subscribe here to Esoterica and check out my other content on topics in a wide range of topics on esotericism and the occult. Also, if you want to support the work of providing accessible, scholarly, and free content on topics in esotericism here on YouTube, I'd hope you support my work by taking a look over at my Patreon, considering a one-time donation, perhaps with PayPal. You can use the super thanks option below the video, or you can pick up some of our fantastic merch, black metal style merch, over at the store tab on the channel. But now let's turn to the diabolical possessions of Loudun and the Satanic Pact, which, in part, along with a heap of politics, doomed Urbain Grandier to the pyre. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. The evil that would befall Loudun through the 1630s was probably foreshadowed, even precipitated, with the arrival of the plague, killing around 3,700 of the city's population of only 14,000. People fled the city out of the fear of the literal wrath of God, and those that remained isolated themselves for months to weather the epidemic. Not that that doesn't strike a bell. Even as the plague subsided, it appears it was followed by long-term social anxiety, mistrust, and a kind of lingering madness in the town, the disastrous effects of the mental health of people surrounded and isolated by months with death and sickness. Among those locked away were the world of the Ursuline nuns, those convent founded there in 1626. From 1632, the convent of only 17 nuns with an average age of only 25 was led by Jeanne d'Ange. Most of the young women there were from aristocratic backgrounds and, frankly, were involuntarily sequestered in the convent. They weren't there because they wanted to be religious. They were there because they were unmarriageable for a range of reasons, from financial hardship of simply having too many daughters in one family to, frankly, things like physical difference, as was the case for Jeanne. It was a positively difficult life for these young women who were otherwise used to some degree of luxury. They came from aristocratic backgrounds. Their food was Spartan. Their convent was an old home converted into a convent. In fact, it was allegedly haunted, as the rumors go, with little in the way of accommodation. It's said that these women even slept on the floors for lack of basic furniture. It was a life of poverty, chastity, and tedium, and 5 months into the twilight of the plague, it became a life of supernatural and demonic obsession, and then widespread possession. The prioress would be the first to see a specter in her room at night. It was apparently the ghost of a recently deceased confessor, requesting simply that she pray with him. Over time, this ghost would appear increasingly through the night and then in the day as well, and the simple requests for prayer were now increasingly replaced with lewd and obscene commands. The priest was morphing in appearance, in fact. What began as an appearance of just a everyday ghost, everyday ghost, soon revealed itself to be a demonic presence, and one by one the women of the convent began to show the telltale signs of possession. The early exorcisms were largely a private affair. They were confined secretly inside the walls of the convent, though the people of Loudun knew and were pretty suspicious, frankly, of the women of the convent. As in many cases of early exorcism, the ritual just made the situation worse. It exaggerated, exacerbated the possession. It spread and intensified. The behavior of the women became increasingly disturbing. And it was also becoming quite clear that a lone rookie exorcist was simply not up to the task of confronting a dozen or more violently possessed women, and possessed, frankly, with a real who's who of demons. We got Astaroth and Beelzebub and Leviathan, the devils here. I mean, of course, this is a real retinue of true diabolical aristocrats. Around the same time that the possessions began to take hold, the world of politics would also come to bear on Loudun. Catholics and Protestants, these are the Huguenots of history, were split not only religiously but also into a relation on a very thorny issue about the very walls of the city of Loudun, the walls and the keep. The king and his allies, especially the famed Cardinal Richelieu, wanted to demolish the defensive structures as part of their centralizing monarchical absolute power. The Protestants, on the other hand, for relatively obvious reasons, and even a chunk of the Catholics, a plurality of the Catholics' townspeople, wanted to keep their walls, both in the interest of short-term defense against mercenary armies, which had hassled the region, but also just in the interest of local autonomy. People like their walls. Let them have their walls. This would all come to a head when a local militia actually blocked the attempt of the king's agent to demolish the walls in the Tower Keep. And at the center of this resistance was the dashing, arrogant, and popular priest Urbain Grandier. Popular with the Huguenots and the ladies, apparently, Grandier had made a host of enemies through his serial philandering and had been previously censored in the years previous. He was forbidden to even officiate Mass. He openly mocked his enemies in the town. He lambasted Richelieu and at least allegedly mocked him in a satire, and he even argued against the necessity of priestly celibacy because, reasons. He really wasn't about that. Le Bourdemont, the king's agent, returned to Paris to report on this whole matter of the walls and the towers not being torn down like the king wanted, but also on this increasingly out of control situation of the possessions at the Ursuline convent, a situation that had taken a positively, decisively dangerous turn for Grandier, as during one of the exorcisms on October 11th, 1632, kind of around now time of the year, he was indicted by name as having used sorcery to bewitch the convent, spiritually breaching the sacred community by throwing a corrupt bundle of roses over the wall. The situation had now all come together into a perfect storm to kill Grandier. Now, it's rather clear that Grandier's arrogance blinded him to the gravity of his situation. His licentious lifestyle had earned him the ire of many powerful men in the region. His sympathy and popularity with the Protestants made him suspect to the more ardent Catholics in the area. He probably, maybe, mocked the power of Cardinal Richelieu. He employed cronyism in his position in the church to get restored to his positions after being officially found guilty of immorality, and he was seen as part and parcel of the resistance to the demolition of Loudun's walls. Atop all of that, the possessed women were now directly naming him as nothing less than the cause of their demonic infestation by the use of diabolical sorcery. This is really bad. Perhaps Grandier didn't realize his situation, or maybe he thought that his cronies would, again, deliver him out of the situation. Perhaps he dismissed the cackling of the Ursulines, like many citizens of Loudun did, as nothing more than the acting out, a kind of macabre stunt pulled by the once spoiled women, the nuns of the convent. Or Maybe he knew that any accusation of sorcery, this would be a capital case, of course, if convicted, would be sent all the way over to the Parliament of Paris, where no sorcery cases had actually come to execution, even strong conviction, since 1624, the Parliament being one of the greatest breaks on the witch hunts in Europe. Regardless, he miscalculated, and he miscalculated badly. The king's agent returned not only to demolish the walls, but to investigate the possession case and Grandier's role in it. As you can imagine, Grandier was arrested on a range of charges in November of 1634, and by May the following year, the king's agent had fully closed the trap. He received complete royal power of a full investigation over both the criminal proceedings of the wall and what was going on with the women possessed at Loudun, and most importantly, he had been granted the power to prevent any outside interference, including any appeals to the Parliament of Paris. Now, it's difficult not to imagine this whole business as anything other than some elaborate Rube Goldberg machine for the destruction of Grandier by Richelieu and the host of enemies that he had made along the way. The philandering. Regardless, the trial would now shift to the testimony of two voices, that of the nuns, especially Jeanne d'Ange, and that of the host of demons, the voice of the demons that was now speaking through them. The Loudun affair is perhaps the best documented sorcery trial in all of European history. There is a mountain of archives spread over several different massive archives, from the minutes of the exorcisms themselves to the proceedings of the trial, and it's frankly rightly become grist for the mill for novels, plays, films, and music. At the center of this drama is without any doubt Jeanne d'Ange, the prioress of the convent and ground zero for the possessions, alleged to be possessed by no less than 7 different demons: Leviathan, Aman, Macaron, Balaam, Asmodeus, and Behemoth. It's quite a party in there. She would display the most violent tortures of possession, and yet her maiming Grandier is powerfully sus. Don't trust this. She actually admitted during the proceedings for having fallen in love with him, though they never met, it seems, and she would both indict and then recant the role Grandier allegedly played in all of this, even going so far as claiming that she would hang herself unless the sorcery trial against Grandier was stopped. Of course, with the trap sprung, there's no way he was getting out of this. Thus, between the politics of the walls, the religious tensions between Catholics and Protestants, the litanies of animosities against Grandier, people personally hating him, we can also add a clear psychosexual drama to the mix as well. I mean, these are pinned up young women, one of which was clearly in love with him at some point. But the situation was to become even more bizarre, if you could believe that. The once private exorcisms, again, in the secrecy of the convent, with several active priests, even some visiting bishops were involved. There was a range of doctors and apothecaries administering a range of compounds on these women. At times, this is just little else than human experimentation, frankly, and no doubt a lot of these concoctions only deepen the crisis. God knows what these apothecaries were giving some of these young women. Well, what was once private now became public exorcisms, public spectacles with thousands of people visiting Loudun over the following years as spectators. Indeed, the spectacle of women barking, screaming, and luridly writhing about in public would even convince some of the local Protestants for the truth of the Catholic Church, they got the demon thing, and perhaps the Catholics knew. They knew the truth. You should never let a good possession go to waste. The exorcisms and sorcery trial of Grandier would produce 2 of the more fascinating documents in demonological history, a kind of typology inventory of the possessed women. The demons doing so were said to have possessed them in the locations where, inside of their bodies, the demons were to be located, interestingly enough. One of the demons, for instance, Cerberus, no less, lodged above the heart of one of a young woman. Another, about the age of 19, had 4 such demons, including Bereth, lodged in the opening of her stomach. And indeed, she had gone long periods without eating. Another, Isabel, aged 18 or 19, had Maron underneath her left breast, Peru underneath her heart, Beelzebub and Astaroth beneath her left armpit. Another, Lion d'Enfer, was underneath her navel. Coal of impurity was beneath her left hip, and other demons were seen to be moving throughout the body, just beneath the skin. So Cronenberg body horror. Again, they would always elude the exorcists and the physicians, chasing them and trying to expel them. Many of these demons mentioned in these lists, eventually 27 women, would become possessed, obsessed, or otherwise maleficated, are demonic stars. Leviathan, Beelzebub, Astaroth, Asmodeus, among others. Some of the others are pretty obscure, but nevertheless do appear in demonic lists, such as those found in the necromantic literature of the time, Bereth being a prime example. Now, knowledge of these specifically necromantic demons is also going to prove germane in just a moment, so keep Bereth in your back pocket. Yeah. Other demons appear to be just forces of pollution or corruption, even kind of demonic animals. One of them is named Baruch, ironically, Hebrew for blessed, and another is named Luther. Luther, like Martin Luther, perhaps a demonic Protestant. Take that, Huguenots. Regardless, the demonic catalog and the bodily cartography of these women are a lesser known, but I think very important addition to the great demonic catalogs, such as the Livre d'Esprit, which would become the core of the Pseudomonarchia Daemonum of Johann Weyer, which in turn, of course, would become the core of the Goetia of the Lesser Key of Solomon. So, to be added to the list of catalogs of demonic entities, we have to go to the trials at Loudun. The second document, or really a set of documents of interest, are the diabolical pacts, which emerge from the proceedings. Now, as you probably know from my episodes on the early modern witch trials, which you can check out a whole playlist about that, the diabolical pact was core to what scholars now denote as the elaborated theory of witchcraft. This is the mature notion of witchcraft as developed in the minds of the inquisitors, of the jurists, the theologians, and the philosophers of late medieval and early modern Europe. In this period, this idea, this theory held that a new, largely women-led heretical sorcery sect had appeared in Europe, and it was marked by the entering into a pact or a covenant with the devil, and thus apostasy from Christianity. That's very important. It's not just the sin of sorcery, it's heresy. This included sexual relations with the devil and various demons, aerial flight for the purposes of attending a thing called the Sabbat or the Sabbath, sometimes a synagogue, because why not add some anti-Semitism in there, which is, of course, presided over by Satan himself, in which he would initiate people into said pact, which would be followed, of course, by incestuous and promiscuous sex, because why do they get to have all the fun? The general practice of maleficent magic, the slaughtering of fetuses and babies, and various means of preventing human beings from procreating, largely by using magic to make men's penises disappear. It's really worried people in the Malleus Maleficarum. The aim of all this was to undermine Christianity and all of Christendom as part of the devil's ongoing war with God. In fact, by the mid-15th century, this theory just became positively apocalyptic and actually argued that the new witch heresy was part of the final attempt on the part of Satan to forestall his impending doom by sending all of human beings down a spiral of sin and crime, as the devils want to do, as a kind of final outrage against God. But core to this theory was the pact that the devil made with the said witch or sorcerer that brought them into this anti-Christian demonic service. It armed them with demonic supernatural powers, and it induced them to, well, to go from just mere sinners, as I mentioned, to recalcitrant heretics. That's why witchcraft in this period is so viciously persecuted. Of course, no evidence of witches along the lines of this theory have ever come to light. It was basically a European-wide murderous conspiracy theory. We've all moved on since conspiracy theories, right, folks? That's not a thing anymore, is it? And thus, virtually none of these pacts have survived because there were just no witches, with a few exceptions. The trial of Urbain Grandier being one of those rare exceptions. We get a pact in this trial. In fact, 3 such pacts, 2 in French and 1 in Latin, were produced throughout the trial. one of which was introduced in a positively bizarre sequence during an exorcism. On May 17, 1634, there was an exorcism, a public exorcism going on in a packed church in the presence of the bishop, so you can imagine it was quite a show. The possessed woman, our sister Dange, was possessed at that time by Leviathan, Behemoth, and Asmodeus, and the exorcist and the demons were futzing about. One was tricking the other one, and it's kind of humorous, actually. At any rate, at some point during the proceedings, they were trying to force the demons to produce the pact, a core contention during the trial. It's a core contention of this whole belief. During the exorcisms, the woman was eventually bound down and she was writhing about as possessed people do, and demonically declared that the pact was evidently beneath the soutane of the attending bishop. It was beneath the bishop. And upon inspection, a blood-soaked paper was found that read, and I'm quoting here, "I deny God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Mary, and all the saints, particularly St. John the Baptist," that guy, "the church, both triumphant and militant, all the sacraments, all the prayers prayed therein. I promise never to do good, to do all the evil I can, and would wish not to be a man at all, but to have my nature changed into a devil, so that I could better serve thee, thou my Lord and Master Lucifer. And I promise thee that even if I am be forced to do some good work, I will not do it in God's honor, but in scorning him, and in thine honor, that all of the devils, and that I ever give myself to thee, and pray thee always to keep well the bond that I gave thee." Signed, Urbain Grandier. Of course, the pact informs us that it was actually written in blood, but it's only a copy of the original, which of course remains in the infernal archives. It was taken out of the infernal archives, copied by a demon, then put underneath the soutane of the bishop. Another such pact, written in abbreviated Latin, perhaps also written in blood, with one page actually written backwards in reverse order, because you spin the wreck around backwards and you get Sad Satan and Led Zeppelin here, was previously housed in the archives of Poitiers, where it has since gone missing. Please don't steal things from archives, no matter how metal they are. This two-part pact, the first of which swears Grandier's allegiance to Lucifer and his rejection of the Catholic Church, just like the first one. The second enumerates that he will be given, quote, "the love of women, the flower of virgins, the respect of monarchs, honors, lusts, and powers, that he be allowed to live another 20 years or so, and that he would later join us, the demons, to sin against God." Now, perhaps the most fascinating element, without any doubt, the most fascinating element about this pact are the demonic seals and signatures of Lucifer, Beelzebub, Satan, Astaroth, Leviathan, Elimi, and the demonic scribe. We should never forget the demonic scribe. Someone has to do the writing here, Balbreth, which endorses the document. Now, while the eerie symbols that mark the text do not exactly match any specific demonic seals that I know of, and admittedly I haven't checked them all, this would be a fun project for AI, it's profoundly interesting to note that they are, in fact, very much consistent with the demonic seals found in the necromantic literature of that time. Which is to say, and I think this is terribly fascinating, whoever composed this document, unless it was really demons, did in fact have some knowledge of the style, one can say, the aesthetic of demonic seals found in contemporary books of magic at that time, many of which were actually in print by the 1630s. For instance, the Opera Omnia of Agrippa had been printed around 1600, with one of the two volumes being basically a small portable library of all the popular magical books of the day, including, of course, the 3 books of occult philosophy, the Arbatel for planetary magic, the Heptameron for summoning angels, the Ars Notoria without the Notai, the spurious 4th book of occult philosophy, etc. People actually had access to lots of magical books. Thus, the pact, regardless of who composed it, certainly belongs in the history of demonological semiotics, right alongside the famous sigils of the Lesser Key of Solomon, which, by the way, would be composed just across the channel in England, less than a decade from the affair at Loudun. Demonological semiotics. This sounds like a Krallis album. I mean, look, at least you get pretty good band titles here, if nothing else, here at Esoterica. During the course of the trial, Grandier would be brought before the possessed women in the hopes that he could exorcise them from the very demons that he was alleged to have, well, unleashed upon them. That failed. It did not work. The demons just mocked the very certainly doomed Grandier at this point. Of course, he was going to be found guilty, and in August of 1634, and he was found guilty, and he was subjected to the torture of the boot. His legs were broken and crushed all the while, and he refused to name or confess at all. He refused to name accomplices because there just weren't any. Not breaking under such horrific torture is surely testimony to his extreme courage and fortitude. But fate would not even allow him the mercy of strangulation before he was incinerated. Ultimately, he was burned alive and his ashes were disposed of. The execution of Grandier did not, however, bring an end to the possessions. Little by little, the demons did exit over the course of the next 3 years. Again, the public spectacle of this continued, and it became a kind of demented tourist attraction. People would just go down to Loudun one day to go see some exorcisms. Though I have to admit, frankly, I'd have probably gone. I mean, that's quite a show, and free. Richelieu, perhaps having accomplished his mission with the execution of Grandier, would eventually put the whole affair to an end. He would have them sequestered and the public exorcisms ended. The first woman possessed, having experienced everything from hysterical pregnancy to suicidal gestures and a range of fits and states of possession, Jeanne d'Ange would be the last to be freed of the demons. After a pilgrimage, the last of the demons, Behemoth is the last holdout, fled Jeanne d'Ange, leaving behind a miraculous sign, the names of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and a recent French saint, permanently imprinted upon her hand. She would ultimately travel France as a kind of religious celebrity, and people went on pilgrimage to touch the hand of miracles. Others involved in the affair were less blessed. Some went insane, some died oddly and prematurely. Surin, the final exorcist in the whole matter, eventually found himself possessed for years and nearly committed suicide and was regularly tormented by the demons. One of his letters to a confessor priest survive, and it's eerie to read. He would be eventually exorcised and nursed back to health by the Jesuits. Thank you, Jesuits. The physicist and diplomat Balthazar de Moncrief would himself see the sacred hand of Jeanne d'Ange, and grasping her hand like so many other pilgrims, he managed to rub off a bit of the M from the name of the Virgin Maria. He rubbed off a bit of the M. Make of that what you will. Jeanne d'Ange would die herself on January 29th, 1665, over 30 years after the torture and incineration of Urbain Grandier at her indictment. The affair at Loudun is a chapter in the early modern witchcraft trials bookmarked by the Aix-en-Provence possessions of April of 1611, which I will cover at some point. It's a real blueprint for what happened at Loudun, all the way to the trials in colonial Salem and Massachusetts through February of 1692 through May of 1693, all of which where we have a situation where alleged witchcraft and diabolical possession form a kind of sinister circuit. What to make of these events is another question, frankly. Contemporary accounts run the gamut of absolute credulity. The women spoke languages they didn't know, allegedly. They contorted in ways that should have broken their bones. And allegedly, they levitated in plain sight. We even get measurements of just how far they levitated off the ground and for how long they levitated. You also get much more guarded reporting, like this nice little 1694 volume that I have here, which in fact is the earliest document that extensively quotes through the trial record and gives us some sense of what was actually lost during the records. This preserves things that would have otherwise been lost. Frankly, it reads a bit like a true crime text, especially reveling in the more lurid and supposedly supernatural elements of the whole business, part of why I hate the true crime genre. Of course, it also gleefully describes the probing of Grandier's body with pins, basically nails to find the devil's mark, which they found. They pushed virtual nails an inch into his flesh, sometimes all the way into the bone, along with his torture in the boot and his botched execution, which all make for positively cheery reading. Others, like the philosopher John Locke, saw the entire matter at Loudun as pure conspiratorial murder organized by crown and collar. Even some of the women that were possessed broke the act from time to time. There was an instance where some burning sulfur landed on the lips of one of the women who was possessed, and she suddenly stopped being possessed. She stopped performing, and even briefly admitted the fraud to the exorcist, who just kept going. Locke himself deemed it all a cheat. The possessions at Loudun spawned a mountain of literature during their time. A virtual cottage industry of publications sprung up around the incident. I mean, who doesn't want to read lurid stories about, I don't know, sex and nuns and all this? And they continue down to this day, with music, film, and tourism at Loudun greatly benefiting from the whole sordid affair. In fact, in my opinion, one of the best books written on the topic, is one that intersects with the philosophy in the early modern witch trials, is by Michel de Certeau. It's a fantastic book if you like French postmodernism and Satanism. Of course, The Devils of Loudun by Aldous Huxley is also a must-read on the topic, and, well, Russell's much-banned 1971 X-rated The Devils should be on any Esoterica's fan. Like, you should watch it. It's fantastic. It was even a bit cozy, frankly, to, I don't know, kind of charming to cozy up with this 1694 volume, only to realize how bad my French has gotten, frankly. And it's gotten pretty chilly here, and there was a fall raining coming down, and I just lit the first fire of the season, or I would stove, and had a healthy dose of red wine to read about exorcism and possession and torture. Cheery. The Loudun possessions have a lot to teach us about human weakness, corruption, political opportunism, sexual repression, and sexual excess. Those always go together. A society, frankly, with no productive role for a whole class of women within it, to the evils of church and state, mental illness, all brought together as public theater, with exorcism and demonology acting as director. Now, Esoterica is not my bully pulpit, but the affair at Loudun is a moment where the well of history, I think, offers us a great many lessons. I hope this episode encourages you to give it a good study. We all can learn something from the possession case at Loudun, and I hope we tarry to repeat what went on there. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time here at Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.